Welcome back to the Climate Solutions News podcast. I'm Dominic Shales. Equans is one of the largest technical services companies operating in the UK, with 12,000 employees working across facilities management, regeneration, and energy and digital services, all directed at helping organisations accelerate the transition to a low-carbon world. And globally, the company operates in 20 countries with 83,000 employees and a turnover of 18.7 billion euros. And within the broad portfolio, Retrofit sits at the sharp end. Retrofits upgrading existing buildings to improve energy efficiency and reduce carbon emissions, typically through insulation, low carbon heating, and other fabric improvements. It's where the gap between climate ambition and delivery is often most visible, and where the questions about whether the UK has the workforce, the funding architecture, and the policy stability to deliver at the required pace are most pressing. Andrew Spencer, our guest today, is Energy and Carbon Services Director at Equans UK and Ireland. And under his leadership, Equans has delivered more than £135 million of low-carbon retrofit and decarbonisation works through the Public Sector Decarbonisation Scheme, supporting over 30 public sector partners, including local authorities, hospitals and universities. So today we're focusing on what retrofit at scale truly requires across workforce capability, funding mechanisms and policy frameworks. Andrew, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Dominic. Thank you for the introduction.
Why don't you kick us off by explaining more eloquently and in a bit more detail about your specific role at Equans and what you do?
So I sit within our strategic development team, and my role for the sort of past 5 years within the business has been to unlock scale of decarbonisation across the UK for our customers. So that is in various different forms, but it's essentially setting the strategy and the proposition to unlock value in the system. We have been quite heavily focused on place-based decarbonisation over the sort of last 5 years, as we feel that that is a mechanism to create the pipeline and scale to create true value in the system.
Great. We'll come on to place-based decarbonisation and get you to explain that in a little while. But to kick things off, I mean, I've read comments that you've made asking whether the UK's plans to scale retrofit are bold enough, given the pace of the climate crisis demands. What does bold enough mean in practice, and where is the system currently falling short?
So I guess to meet our current sort of 2050 targets within the UK, we need to retrofit between 1 and 1.5 million buildings per year. Our current targets that we're meeting are under 100,000 per annum. So that just therefore really is a 10 to 15% increase required in the UK. What I would say to that is that we're not meeting our targets. It's quite simply, we're not going at the pace and scale required.
And why is that though? I mean, because everyone can see the gap, but so why is
Yeah.
it just not happening?
So we've spoken about those three elements earlier. So it's workforce, funding, and policy, and the alignment of all three, really. So our current workforce, we do not have the capability or the capacity in the system to deliver those numbers. But we currently do not have the pipeline or stability of the pipeline required to meet that. And that is driven largely by policy. So for me, one of the things that I should hesitate there slightly, there has been some optimistic changes very, very close now, that we're getting towards where we need to be from a policy point of view. But even when I look at policy at the moment, we have huge targets set by the sort of Warm Homes Programme, for example, But then when you dive down into the standards and the policies that back that up, they're not being policed correctly. And we're falling short at the bottom. So we're never going to be able to meet our targets from a policy point of view. The funding landscape that's required, we know that the public purse can't cope with all the requirements. We're looking around about a 10 to 20 billion annual requirement. The public purse can't take that. Private funding is required in that space. So for me, at the moment, the funding policy isn't driving the pipeline, and therefore our workforce is quite largely SME in the UK, and they're not investing into the workforce because there is no stability around funding over the long term. They're very big problems that need to be reviewed and undertaken. And at the moment, what is happening is we're looking at this as a construction problem in the UK. It is not a construction problem. It is an infrastructure problem within the UK that needs to be aligned. And I believe government need to take that stance and move forward.
I've read somewhere that we need something in the region of 400,000 people to be doing this work. Would you agree with that? And it feels completely unachievable just in terms of the numbers, if that is the case.
Yeah, so the estimates vary. They really do, but not much. So between 200,000 to 500,000 within the industry, but that's very broad. That's that's installers of insulation, heat pumps, and ventilation. Electricians are required into the system, and that will be a major constraint due to sort of electrification of heat in the main. But retrofit coordinators, designers, all coming under sort of the PAS 2035 lens there. We need surveyors, assessors. So it is very broad when we talk about those 200,000 to 500,000 gap there. What is happening at the moment, I suppose, it's not just the trades. It's a skills mix shift in entirety. So it's a very different competency model that's required to meet our needs, and it's around integration. So it's not the bottleneck isn't just competence. Is competence, not just headcount, I suppose, as well in that area. And it's largely due to that sort of market fragmentation. We're highly SME based within the UK, regionally fragmented, and we're just not scaled for sort of program delivery. And that ultimately is where we need to be. So at the moment, that sort of limits the sort of standardization, the productivity, and the quality assurance in this space. We've got a training and accreditation gap in that space. So under PAS 2035, we need retrofit coordinators. They're severely undersupplied at the moment. We need retrofit designers and assessors. But the training pipeline is extremely slow at the moment. 12 to 24 months for competency, poorly funded at the moment, and lacks that sort of career, a clear career pathway. So for me, what needs to happen in that element is around an industrialization of the system to create scale and create that pipeline going forward. So we need to create that scalable engine in the UK.
I'm not feeling massively optimistic from what you say about this, Andrew. It feels like there are many hurdles to overcome. Is this a particular UK problem? It's doing it better. Where can we learn from? And what are the characteristics of this country that make it seem everything to do with property, quite frankly, seems to be so difficult to move forward?
Well, I am optimistic about the UK. I would say we've done major infrastructure projects like this before historically. There is a gap at the moment around it, and you can look at other major UK infrastructure projects. But I am optimistic. I'm optimistic about the future in this space. Who else is doing it better? So there is major plays all across Asia in this space, but quite heavily in the sort of renewable generation space at the moment, where I think the built environment is done better is in the likes of Germany, where they've had strong policy over this over quite some time, with funding essentially. So the German market is one that I look to and go, yes, it can be done. We we believe it's not just a retrofit problem. Like I said, this is a huge holistic infrastructure problem, and actually can be done when you look at that lens right from the top and you go generation, demand from a built environment, storage. And when you look at this is why I'm so passionate about the place-based lens, is that when you look at that over the top and you use systems thinking, actually you can drive the demand, the pipeline, and a solid, stable pipeline over for long term to create the environment to make it a success. So that's why I believe we will get there. Retrofit and is also a big part of resilience in the UK, to ensure that we have energy security into the future. So the less demand that we have on our built environment will ultimately improve our energy security going forward. So whilst net zero is actually in the political lens at the moment, and I think that is what you're seeing a lot from a political point of view going on, actually the impacts and the outcomes that the work create are far greater than just decarbonisation. So if we start to take that lens around the work that we're doing as an industry, I think you'll see the scale start to come to fruition.
You've mentioned place-based decarbonisation a couple of times. It would be useful just to explain a bit more what you mean about that. And you've been involved in the UK's first net zero neighbourhood in Dudley, supporting the council's transitions to zero carbon there. So maybe just give us that definition and talk about that project a little bit more.
So place-based decarbonisation, it says it in the name, I hope. So every place is different. And we say this around the UK. What will work in the centre of London will not necessarily work in the Highlands of Scotland. So every place is different, and therefore the solutioning that is required is very different in each piece. But that allows an integrator of a place to pull different levers requiring on that piece. And we look at it across sort of 4 different lenses within Equans. One is what we call a systems optimization. So that's almost our technical lens there, the technical solution. And that includes transport, that includes generation, that includes storage, that includes retrofit. Is everything in a place that you can think that creates carbon and about how we live. We then look at the funding landscape off the back of that technical solution or that system solution and go, what funding can be required and merged around that? So we use a blended funding approach. Already said that the public purse can't meet all the requirements. So private investment, and that can come from what we're now deeming the puffins in the UK, so National Wealth Fund, GB Energy and the like, to come in and bring in national wealth into the system within infrastructure plays there. And then we look at what we call our social maximisation lens. So the work that we're doing is being carried out by people in that place and in that area. So we're creating an economic value within that space. We're creating a social value in that space. So when we look at something like retrofit, there are big health improvements to people's lives. So there's actually a reduction in the health budget that's required. We can keep people in their homes for longer. We can reduce the energy bill down for your NHS trust, so that there is lots of economic value, there is social value there, and there's greater environmental value within that system also that we can create through the works we're doing. So we talk about this social maximization, not just about what we do, but how we do it. So that is a big thing within the UK that we need to get right. And last but not least, I suppose it's around what we deem our legal and commercial innovation in that space. So we are at the moment delivering project by project in the UK. That doesn't create value in the system. We need to get to a program level, which can bring in investment, not just from the UK, but overseas into the UK. What that will do is create that stability of pipeline. It will drive workforce, create greater levels and number of workforce in the UK in that place. It's circular as we go forward.
Yeah, I mean, it's a very complex landscape that you've been describing, with so many different actors, so many different competing sometimes priorities, and Equans obviously sits in the middle of a lot of these situations. Who's your actual client? Who takes the decision to do this? Because it sounds like it needs a strong controlling centre to actually make anything happen here.
It does. Our main clients in the sort of place-based approach to date have been local authorities and combined authorities in this space. So West Midlands Combined Authority, for example, delivered the first net zero neighbourhood alongside Dudley Borough Council in Brockmoor. So they are the local leadership. And that's why I'm quite optimistic about devolution in the UK, but also LGR, so local government reform in this space, because what we should see is a far greater level of power being passed into the local area to allow them to pull these levers to make this a success, essentially. And we are starting to see that. So Greater Manchester, West Midlands combined authorities, and the other combined authorities aren't far behind, if I'm honest. They're all thinking along the same lines, and it's fantastic to see. So, I think that is the unlocker, the devolved powers and the funding that comes alongside that to allow that to happen.
Great. Just in our last couple of minutes, we'll turn to you're presenting and attending the Reset Connect London event coming up in a couple of weeks, on the 23rd and 24th of June in London. What are you hoping to get out of your involvement at the event? And in an increasingly virtual world, what do you see the role of these events actually being?
So for me, a key point that I always have at conferences, networking. I love it. I love to see people at these events and talk to SMEs all the way through to politicians and local government and like. So for me, that is a big thing that I like to do at these events, is going network. So if you do see me around, please talk to me. In a digital world, please reach out. We have our websites and things like that, if you need any further information. And also a little bit of sort of messaging around this. You say it's very complex, but, working in this, maybe it's me complicating it on this call, but actually there are how do you break down the elephant, I guess, is the thing. So there are small pieces to this with, like you said, many actors in the room. So for me, maybe I can hope to demystify some of the complexity around this as we go forward. So yeah, that's what I'm looking forward to, and looking forward to change, I suppose. Far too long have we been talking about this, and maybe a bit of change and a bit of action is where I'm at.
Very good. Well, that's you've been optimistic throughout the whole conversation, despite the backdrop that you've been painting, and thank you for that. And I hope that that continues. So, very, very best of luck with pushing all of this forward. Andrew Spencer, Energy and Carbon Services Director at Equans UK and Ireland. Thank you very much for joining us. Now, if you want to read any more about these topics that we've been discussing today, along with news, views, and interviews on climate tech more broadly, you can find us at climatesolutions.news. And if this conversation was useful, please share it and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. We'll be back soon with more interviews with the people shaping climate policy and technology. Thank you very much.